This is Walter Bosley, and I'm going to read a selection from The Secret Voyage of Sir Francis Drake by Samuel Bawlf. Postscript, an old sailor's yarn. Not long after the news of Drake's death at sea reached England in April 1596, the government received a curious new proposal for the discovery of the Northwest Passage. Martin Frobisher's former associate Michael Locke was residing in Venice at the time, and in April he was introduced to a so-called ancient pilot of ships, a Greek named Juan de Fuca, who told him a remarkable story of his own discovery of the passage. De Fuca, whose real name was Apostolos Valerianos, was returning to his homeland after 40 years' service with the Spaniards in the New World. He told Locke that he was aboard the Manila galleon Santa Ana when she was captured by Thomas Cavendish in 1587, and that he had lost goods of his own worth 60,000 ducats in the raid. Then he said he was the pilot of 3 ships that the Viceroy of New Spain sent out with 100 soldiers to discover the Strait of Anian and fortify it to prevent its use by the English. But the voyage was cut short on account of a threatened mutiny. However, the surviving account states, and I quote, "He said that shortly after the said voyage was so ill-ended, the said Viceroy of Mexico sent him out again, anno 1592, with a small caravella and a pinnace armed with mariners only, and that he followed his course in that voyage west and northwest in the South Sea, all alongst the coast of New Spain and California and the Indies, now called North America." All of which voyage he signified to me in a great map and a sea card of my own, which I laid before him, until he came to the latitude of 47 degrees, and that there finding a broad inlet sea between 47 and 48 degrees of latitude, he entered thereinto, sailing therein for more than 20 days. And also he said that being entered thus far into the said strait, and finding the sea wide enough everywhere, he therefore set sail and returned homeward again toward New Spain, where he arrived at Acapulco anno 1592. End quote. De Fuca told Locke that when he returned, the Viceroy promised to reward him for his discovery. After 2 years, however, he still had not been paid, so he went to Spain. There, he said, he was received at the court, but again no reward was forthcoming. The reason, he concluded, was that the Spanish understood the English had given up their quest for the discovery of the Northwest Passage, and therefore his information was no longer of any importance. Yet, if the Queen of England restored to him the value of the goods that Cavendish had seized from him, and furnished him with 1 ship of 40 tons burden and a pinnace, he offered to complete the discovery of the Northwest Passage in 30 days' time from one end to the other of the straits. After Locke wrote down De Fuca's description of his voyage and his proposal to complete the discovery of the Northwest Passage, De Fuca continued his journey home to the island of Cephalonia. Locke exchanged letters with him while writing to Burghley and Hakluyt for the money to bring him to England, but then he learned that De Fuca had died. In England, Hakluyt apparently contemplated including De Fuca's story in his second edition of Principal Navigations. As he organized Locke's letters into this narrative, but the account did not appear in his volumes and was not finally published until Samuel Purchas found it among Hakluyt's papers and included it in his great book of travels, Purchas, His Pilgrims, in 1625. Although the strait at the southern end of Vancouver Island was subsequently named after him, historians have tended to view Juan de Fuca's account as purely apocryphal. There is no record of the voyage that he claimed to have undertaken at the Viceroy's behest in 1592, or of him being received at the royal court of Spain. Moreover, the earlier voyage, on which he claimed to have served as a pilot, which did accurately describe regarding the threat of a mutiny, actually occurred in 1594. The suspicion, therefore, is that De Fuca's story was nothing more than a fabrication designed to extract money from the English government. When De Fuca's story reached Hakluyt, however, he must have recognized at once that it was actually an account of Drake's northern explorations. Locke's original correspondence containing De Fuca's story has not survived, but all one need to do is substitute 54 and 55 degrees respectively for the latitudes given in the published version and follow the details of De Fuca's story to see that they match Drake's voyage perfectly. And I quote, "He followed his course in that voyage west and northwest to the South Sea, all along the coast, now called North America, until he came to the latitude of 54 degrees, the northwest tip of the Queen Charlotte Islands, and that there, finding that the land trended north and northeast, the southern Alaska archipelago, with a broad inlet of sea between 54 and 55 degrees. Dixon entrance. He entered thereinto, sailing therein more than 20 days, and found the land trending sometime northwest in Clarence Strait, and northeast, and north, and also east, and southward, and a very much broader sea than was at the said entrance, and that he passed by divers islands in that sailing, and that at the entrance to this said strait there is on the northwest coast thereof a great headland or island, with an exceeding high pinnacle or spired rock like a pillar thereon. Also he said that he went on land in divers places, and that he saw some people on land clad in beasts' skins, and also that he had not being armed to resist the force of the savage people that might happen, he therefore set sail." End quote. Thank God. It appears then that Hakluyt, in the course of preparing his draft narrative from Locke's letters, must have altered the latitudes given by De Fuca to conceal the location of the Strait of Anian. Then a decision apparently was taken to omit the account altogether. Still to be resolved, however, is the question of how De Fuca learned the details of Drake's secret explorations. Notably, Drake did capture a pilot his men called Juan Greco, or Juan the Greek, at Valparaiso, Chile in 1578. But he set him free at Callao long before he sailed into the North Pacific. Then, in 1587, Cavendish too captured a Greek pilot on the coast of Chile, and in all probability, these Greeks were one and the same Juan de Fuca. The accounts of Cavendish's voyage do not say where he left the Greek pilot, but it is possible he put him ashore at Cape San Lucas after he captured the Manila galleon. If so, De Fuca would have met Juan Sebastian Vizcaino, a Spanish merchant adventurer who was among the passengers left there from the Santa Ana, and if De Fuca sailed on the first expedition that he described to Locke, the 1594 voyage that was cut short because of a threatened mutiny, then he must have met Vizcaino again, because Vizcaino commanded that expedition. Its real purpose was to establish a military outpost near the southern end of the Baja Peninsula to protect the returning Manila galleons against English pirates, who were believed to have discovered a secret route into the Gulf of California from the north. However, De Fuca must have left the New World shortly after this voyage. In 1602, the Viceroy sent Vizcaino out again, and on this expedition, which sailed up the outer coast of California, possibly as far as latitude 43 degrees north, Vizcaino was accompanied on the voyage by a friar, Antonio de la Ascension, who later wrote that their secret purpose was to discover the Strait of Anian. Behind this quest lay a remarkable story that Ascension told to a colleague, who published a memoir about it in 1626. Ascension recounted that a foreign pilot named Morena had accompanied Drake on his voyage, no doubt the same pilot identified during Drake's raid on Guatulco by the name Morera. According to Ascension's colleague, and I quote, "When the Captain Francisco Drake returned to his country, this pilot who had come emerging from the strait in his company was very sick, and to see if the heirs of the land would give him life as a dead thing, they put him ashore. The pilot, in a few days, recovered health and walked through the land for a space of 4 years. He came forth to New Mexico, and from there to Santa Barbara in the province of Chihuahua, and then passed to the mines of Sombrerete. He had traveled more than 500 leagues of mainland until he came far enough to catch sight of an arm of the sea. The pilot told how this arm of the sea runs from north to south, and then it seemed to him that it went on to the northward to connect with the harbor where the Englishman had put him ashore, and that on the seacoast he had seen many good harbors and great inlets, and that from the point where they put him ashore, he would venture to get to Spain in 40 days in a good ship's tender, and that he must go to get acquainted with the court of England." End quote. Morera's story must have been extracted under interrogation by Spanish authorities, for anyone who even hinted that he wanted to go to the court of the heretic Elizabeth, much less had been with Drake, would have attracted intense scrutiny. However, it appears that Morera also drew a map for his interrogators because Father Ascension produced one that obviously is related to the pilot's story. The map, published in Spain in 1622, was the first to depict California as an island, which it then became on most maps for a century or more thereafter. From the top of the Gulf of California, Ascension's map shows a long, narrow sea passage reaching northward and emerging into a broader opening behind a great square headland clearly resembling the Olympic Peninsula, except that it is placed a little below its true latitude. Undoubtedly, this was the arm of sea described by Morera, and also the origin of Spanish fears that the English had found a way into the Gulf of California from the north. Hence Vizcaino's first expedition in 1594, on which de Fuca appears to have served as pilot. At latitude 49 degrees, Morera evidently drew a river, obviously the Fraser, although either he or Ascension omitted the island of Nova Albion and the Queen Charlotte Islands. At 55 degrees, however, Morera evidently drew a long southward-pointing headland that would be Prince of Wales Island, and there, running northward from the headland to a junction with the Northwest Passage, is Drake's Strait of Anian, albeit somewhat simplified. Clearly, Morera had been with Drake when he discovered the strait, and the Spanish had heard all about the voyage, or at least what Morera had been persuaded to tell them, sometime around 1584. Here undoubtedly was the basis of Juan de Fuca's story. Most probably both he and Ascension had read Morera's account and copied his map when each was in the service of Juan Sebastian Vizcaino. Although their accounts were given from different perspectives, there was nevertheless a common theme, that the Strait of Anian had been discovered, and that one or two small vessels could get through the Northwest Passage, for which there would be a reward from the English government. Ascension's version probably lost some details in the retelling years later by his colleague, who wrote that Morera said a good ship's tender could get to Spain in 40 days, whereas the veteran pilot de Fuca had carefully noted Morera's details of the voyage, and the information that one ship of 40 tons and a pinnace could sail from one end of the passage to the other in 30 days. Obviously, de Fuca and Ascension could not have formed this concept unless Morera had been with Drake when he decided to send a quarter of his company into the Northwest Passage in his captured Spanish bark and pinnace. Moreover, it is hard to credit the idea that Drake would simply have abandoned a member of his company, or even a captive, on the remote northwest coast of America. Nor, as remarkable as Morera's trek must have been, is it likely that an experienced navigator able to obtain his bearings from the stars would have spent 4 years wandering about the land if his aim was to trek southward into Mexico. It very much appears, then, that Morera must have been a member of the company that Drake sent home via his supposed strait. However, the strait came to a dead end 180 miles to the north. Indeed, its end may not even have been reached. The small vessels with all of the curious objects on them would have made tempting prizes for the Tlingit Indians. Morera and his mates may well have been obliged to run for their lives, or they may have found the ice impassable farther up the strait. Whichever the case, they would have no choice but to return to the careenage and await rescue as instructed by Drake. After waiting for 3 years, however, the marooned sailors must have begun to despair. Thus Morera, who may have been the only one of them who spoke Spanish, had undertaken to try to get through Mexico and back to England with an appeal from his comrades to be rescued. It appears, however, that the Spaniards must have forced him to reveal Drake's discovery of the strait, and once he had divulged this knowledge, he would have become an extremely dangerous person to set free. In all probability, his life ended as a Spanish prisoner. As for his stranded shipmates, it appears that Morera had invented the long inland sea passage leading northward from the Gulf of California to distract the Spanish from searching the outer coast for them. It seems safe to assume that despite Drake's best efforts, they were never rescued. That Drake remained convinced he had found the Strait of Anian in spite of his small ships failing to reach England is evident in the enlistment of his relations and other veterans of his voyage, both for the follow-up expedition of Fenton Island and the final attempt by Richard Hawkins to complete his discovery, and from Drake's efforts in his maps and leaked information to leave clues to his northward explorations. There can be no doubt that the achievement he most wanted to be remembered for was this voyage to the farthest corner of the globe to discover the strait. For Drake to have seen this as the highlight of his life's adventures is completely understandable. Indeed, for those who are familiar with the European voyages to the northwest coast of America in the 18th century, it is plain to see that this feat of exploration eclipsed any achieved in that day. Considering the circumstances under which he had to perform his mission, sailing in a small and unimaginably crowded ship with only the crudest of instruments, some 18,000 miles through the uncharted Strait of Magellan and along hostile coasts, even reaching the distant shores of Northwest America was by itself an extraordinary accomplishment. And then to have gained in only a few weeks a comprehension of this labyrinthine coast that would not be equaled until years after its rediscovery, 2 centuries later, was a truly astonishing feat. And finally, to then have sailed another 20,000 miles to bring the Golden Hind home, and yet lose only 1 man out of 60 to scurvy or any other cause on the final leg of this great odyssey, was yet another remarkable accomplishment. Altogether, the voyage was a singular display of navigational skill, leadership, improvisation, and sheer tenacity that was unparalleled in that or any subsequent age. Beyond any question, Sir Francis Drake's secret voyage to the northwest coast of America must be regarded as one of the greatest in the history of global exploration. This is Walter Bosley, and I've just read a selection from The Secret Voyage of Sir Francis Drake by Samuel Bawlf.